attention to how exactly we would like to segment this specific market per se, that is the business market. Because consumer market, we have tried to see that we wanted to segment it on the basis of the different dimensions, that is the psychographic segmentation or demographic segmentation or lifestyle cycle segmentation or socioeconomic segmentation. We've already seen these factors of market segmentation and targeting dimensions. But when it comes down to something called as business market, we've got to look into another important aspect, because at the end of the day, your product is going to be used as an intermediary product or as a raw material for them, because their finished goods is going to incorporate your goods as a raw material, and they would be definitely buying your goods in bulk. So their buying perspective is very going to be different from the consumer market, because the consumer would be purchasing a unit item at a time, but the business market would be purchasing multiple units at a time. That is, they would be purchasing it in bulk, and majority of your business would be coming from the business market itself, because they would be original equipment manufacturers and they would be using your product as a product assimilate or as a product raw material or as a product composite or a product assembly. So effectively, business market is one area which exactly has a lot of scope. In fact, I have got a few papers that I have published in international journals. It's all about the business market, because I was working before I joined into academics. I was working with Shell engine oils, and I was looking after the industrial sales lubes division, where basically my basic job was to look into the industrial sales of the lubricants. Shell was manufacturing a brand called as Rotella, and then it became the Indian brand, became the Rimula oils, and then it had multiple applications for different type of industrial lubes, and we basically were into engine oils, we were into pump set oils, we were into cutting oils, we were into coolants, we were into all different type categories of lubricants which were required for industrial operations. So I have had a series of experience in the area of industrial products and automotive products, as well as uh, uh, products which exactly require high machines, high dynamic machine operations, which exactly was the product. My product Shell was actually looking into it. In fact, we had even a food grade grease which was there, because that grease you can actually eat. You'd be surprised that it is not going to harm you if you eat the grease. It was called the Shell Tellus. So effectively, we were looking into the dairy segment as well as the other web. There are big churners, like Coke was one of our big customers, and the big churners, they were basically putting it into the moving parts where the food was in contact with the churning operation. So we used to actually inject these lubricants into that area. So even if they mix with food, it would not harm you if you ingested it. So that was about 10,000 rupees a kg. Shell tell us the grease that we were using for the food industry. So effectively, when we were trying to sell products to these different segments, especially the business segment, it had a different type of an orientation when it comes to segmenting the business market. So that basically happens to be a very interesting area for me to discuss with all of you today. And I would be taking this opportunity to look into that specific segment. And we exactly segment them also in the context of demographic, operating variables, purchasing approaches, situational factors, as well as personal factors. And we would be looking at these dimensions. So let us look into demographics. So what do we mean by demographics out here? In demographics, we define them within three broad domains. First exactly happens to be industry. So what is the industry we actually try to serve? That is the question that we need to ask. Is this industry going to be specified with automobiles, or is it going to be an electrical industry, or is it going to be a chemical industry, or is it going to be a agricultural industry, or is it going to be a pharmaceutical industry? So we've got to first segment them within the domain of industry. Then what is the company size? What is the size of the company? Is it a micro operation? Is it a medium scale operation? Or is it a large scale operation. We want to be looking at the size of the operation also happens to be the dimension that we would like to be looking into when it comes to a subsection of the demographics. And the third dimension we want to see is where exactly this aspect is located. Where is the organization or the business actually located? So geographically, we want to ascertain the size, as well we want to ascertain the type of the industry that exactly the business is actually catering to. So this exactly happens to be an important aspect when it comes to looking at this specific segment within the domain of demographics. Now coming down to the next variable, which is the operations or the operating variables. Within operating variables, we would be looking at three another factors. First happens to be technology. The second has to be a user or a non-user, and the third is customer capabilities. Now, you might like to focus on what customer technology we focus on. The technology, that is the end customer, is it having a JIT, that is just in time inventory management? Or is it basically a hybrid sort of a model, or is it an electronic model which exactly requires a different level of interaction, or does it require a online or an offline sort of an interaction? So we be looking at the technology. What customer technology should we focus on? That is the first important aspect. The second is, are they heavy users, or are they light users, or are they medium users? So we would be looking exactly at the user or the non-user status within the domain of the operating variable. Then the third important aspect is the aspect of customer capabilities. Now, customer capabilities would be used that should be looking at customers needing few services or many services. Now, for example, let's say, for example, I'm selling a product which exactly requires a huge amount of customer interaction. A customer would always be interacting with me or telling me about their feedback or telling me about their problems. So I'm going to be handling their problems on a real-time basis. Or would it be only once that I tell them about installation and training and then I leave them? That is, they once they are trained or once their product is installed, then my only job is to replenish the product over a period of time at the regular frequency so that the organization does not run out of the product. So effectively, my type of involvement with the customer in the context of the service happens to be the second dimension that is within the domain of operating variable. The third important aspect is called as the purchasing approach. Now, purchasing approach is a very important aspect. That is, how do you purchase? Should we serve the company about a centralized purchase or a decentralized purchasing organization? Now, that is very important because generally what happens is the company is actually located in multiple locations. In businesses, like you have a pan-India sort of an organization which has multiple locations in different states. So that could or be actually doing a different type of a purchasing about the same product at multiple times of a year. So that is a decentralized purchase. Or there is a central office which is doing all the centralized purchase and distributing it on their own. So effectively, that is also going to affect me in the context of segmenting, that is towards the purchasing approach. That is that sub-segment of the purchasing approach. The second important aspect is the power structure. That is, power structure would mean that should we serve the companies that are engineering dominant, financially dominant, and so on. So what is the type of the structure of the company? Are they looking at their purchasing on the context of their financial plannings? That is, they look into it more into the commercial side of it, or they're looking at more the technology side of it, or they're looking at it at the logistical side of it. So let's say, for example, if I'm supposed to be supplying a product to automotive industries, they would like to see that the inventory is least maintained. Now, for maintaining a least size of inventory, it is very important that your workflow process has to be in place. That is, suppose if there's a product, let's say, for example, we are supplying locks from Aligarh to a company called as the Hero Motors, which exactly is making these motorbikes called Honda motorbikes. Okay, so Hero Honda motorbikes. Now we're going to be supplying the key locks to the handle locks to these products and these brands, that the Hero Motors. So they're producing something like around 1,000 bikes a day. Now what happens is, for 1 week if they are producing something like around 7,000 bikes a week, I don't need to supply 7,000 locks on a Monday for 1 week, and then I make it for next week. No, it's just not supposed to be like that. So they would like, sorry, I can't allow somebody to join. Somebody's trying to join in pretty late. Wahab Shamia is trying to join in late, so somebody can tell the person that we are not in for the class. Um, Now, effectively, when you are trying to supply these locks, so let's say you want to supply something like 7,000 locks per week. So you have to design that every day 1 or 2,000 locks or 1,000 locks is going every day to that plant. Okay, so effectively, if you want to look into something like around 3,500 locks have to be supplied in half a week. So every half a week, your truck should actually be reaching that point so that 3,500 locks are supplied every half a week. So you're not supplying 7,000 locks per week, but every 3,500 locks being supplied half a week. And then it has to see that the locks are actually 100% quality assured so that there is no miscalculation and the unnecessarily inventory is not maintained, so that what happens is that no motorbike gets a faulty lock. So, and as well as the goods are moving well in time. So effectively, what really happens is that we have to be very clear when it comes to designing the entire flow process or the movement per se. Now, effectively, this is about the power structure. Then the nature of existing relationship also happens within the purchasing approach. That is, should we serve the company with which we have a strong relationship, or we go with the most desirable company? That is, we have the company has been our customer for quite a period of time, so we exactly are aligned to serving them, or do we come up with a most desirable company to serve? So the company has a huge amount of brand presence or net worth or market share, or has a great amount of value in the marketplace. So it would be an honor to serve that country because company, because we'll be associated with them, and that would encourage our association with the affiliation of that organization. Or we have got something like general processing, general dimension, that is general purchasing policies. Now, general purchasing policies should be the company that basically prefer leasing or service contract or system purchasing or sealed bidding is also what we were actually trying to look at. And then we are also looking at something called as the purchasing criteria. That is, are the company seeking what? Are they seeking service? Are they seeking price, or are they seeking quality? So what exactly are the different type of purchasing approach is what we actually have to see when we decide on looking at the purchasing parameter for the different organization to be segmenting it. I'm sorry to say that purchasing factors has been written twice, but we exactly going to take it only once. Then we're going to come down to something called the situational factors. Now, situational factors also can be sub-segmented into three categories. First is urgency, specific applications, and size or order. Towards urgency, we would like to see whether they require a quick delivery, sudden delivery, or regular delivery. So on the basis of that, we would be deciding the parameter for situational segmentation of the organization. Then the next important is specific application. That is certain application of products rather than all the applications. We would be looking at only certain type of application vis-a-vis all the type of applications. And the size of the order. Is the order size small? Is the order size medium? Or is the order size large? That exactly falls within the situational factor of segmentation on the basis of it. And then finally, we have got something called personal characteristics. Now, within personal characteristics, we want to see how are we similar. That is, how is the buyer and the seller similarity? Do we have a similar type of organization? Are we an engineering organization, or are we a service organization? So we would understand each other's parameters on the basis of our operational entity. That is, are we operating on the same level? Are we operating on different categories or level? Because a product-based company would never understand a service-based company. A service-based company would never try to look at the product-based company's requisite requirement. But if there is a similarity, the type of orientation, then definitely these personal characteristics happen to be a important domain of segmentation variable. Then attitude towards risk. How do we look at risk? For me, a risk would be small, but for the company that I'm trying to sell, that risk may be very, very high. So effectively, how do we look at risk is also an important aspect. And then loyalty. Should we serve companies that show high loyalties to their suppliers, or the companies that, like, let's say for example, we have put our investment into trying to serve a specific company, but then suddenly we find that our consumer is not loyal and then might change us, but that's going to impact us simply of because the size of the business is going to be huge, and we have to actually make a lot of investment if you want to actually cater to this specific segment. And if unfortunately we are not able to cater to this segment, we lose a lot of our inventory, which exactly will be held up. So these are the five dimensions on the basis of which we are going to be segmenting the business market. The business markets can be segmented on the basis of these five dimensions, that is demographic, operating variables, purchasing approaches, situational factors, and personal characteristics. Now, we exactly here exactly are some of the dimensions on the basis of these aspects that we've already discussed. That is need-based segmentation. That is, you custom group your customers into segments based on similar needs or benefits sought by customers, solving a particular consumption problem. Then we've got a segment identification. That is, you identify a need-based segment, and you look at the usage behavior and look at the different type of segments which exactly are identifiable or actionable. Then we've got something called a segment attractiveness. There are certain segments, like for example growth market or competitive intensity or market access, that determine the overall attractiveness of the different type of segments. Also, we determine their profitability. A segment could be very profitable, a segment could not be profitable. And then position. For each segment, we create a value proposition on the basis of which we are actually looking at the customer's needs or characteristics. We also do something called as the segment acid test. That is, we create a segment storyboard to look at the attractiveness and positioning of each of these segments. And then we look at the marketing mix strategy. Now, expand the segment position strategy, including the product, place, price, and promotion. So on these basis, we do the different type of segmenting. Now we are going to look at all the different type of segmentation criteria. We look at the five effective segmentation criteria that it should be measurable. The first and the most important reason is that the segmentation must be actually measurable. It must be certainly substantial in size for it to be viable to look at as a segment. Then you should actually have the reach. That is, you should actually reach it out to that segment. That is, it should be accessible, and it should be differentiable from the next segment, so that two segments must not be so similar that you cannot be able to differentiate between the two. And then you should be able to actually come up with an actionable plan for that specific type of a segment. So these exactly happen to be the dimension. Now this is basically Porter's 5 force framework. Definitely you'll be studying about the competitive framework of these perspective in the aspect of competitive strategy of business concepts of business management. You'll be looking into Porter's 5 force framework. We find how to enter into a business. These are the five dimensions. That is, new people, when new entrants, when they come up to, there are threat of from them. Then there are threat of substitute. So let's say, for example, you're making a product, there's a new product which directly replaces your product. So we'll find a threat of substitute. Then threat of rivalry. That is, for the same business, you've got multiple people coming into the. So these are competitive framework, force framework, on the basis of which we decide our strategy making for the business. So competitive strategy. Then threat of buyer or the bargaining power, and the threat of supplier or the supplier. The inter-rivalry of the firm is missing over here, but there's a fifth dimension also, which is called as the inter-rivalry of the firm. So these five dimensions actually define how exactly the competitive framework of any organization exists. Now, for looking at exactly the different possible levels of segmentation, this is actually a sort of a fishbone diagram that you're trying to see. On the left, we have got the mass market, and the right, we've got customized market. So on this exactly is the entire spectrum of the market. So on the level of segmentation, you are basically having the full market coverage that is on the left side and individual market segments on the right. Then you've got multiple segments again on the left side and then single segment on the right. So this basically takes care of the segmentation of the market. That is, how do you actually segment a specific market? Now, I'm going to be looking at one-to-one marketing. And what exactly do we mean by one-to-one marketing is that identify your prospects and customers. That is the first dimension. Second is differentiate customers in terms of their needs and value to your company. What exactly is the need and how exactly do you look as it their need to as a value for your company? Then interact to improve the knowledge about customers' need and build their relationship. That is, how do you actually improve the knowledge about what customers' needs are and how do you build the relationship and how do you customize the different products, services, and messages for each of the customers that you're going to actually serve. Now, I'm going to come up here with a very interesting case study that I'm going to look into. And we are going to be looking at this case study because this case study is about a specific type of a segment, uh, which is a very interesting segment in the Indian apparel industry, that is garment industry. And I'm going to talk about segmentation. So the title of the case is called as the brand I'm going to be catering to. It's called as a Revolution. Now, this brand is basically catering to a segment which is called as the traditional women's garment, and that women's garment is in large sizes and has been it has never been very difficult to get because of the customized stitching by neighborhood tailors. So effectively, women folk who exactly have a large size, a large size of garments requirement, they basically, so we will be catering to that specific segment because that segment you never find in the regular apparel section for the different type of apparel retailing. You'll never find it over there. So effectively, there was one company that looked into this specific segment because they understand the need that this segment of consumers are not getting products which are readily available in shops. Which exactly why? Because the shops are doing a very clear segmentation because the majority of the customers are in the medium size or the small size, but they basically are not catering to the large size, which is a very small segment, and that's a considerable segment which is there. But then such customers are not getting their goods, so the only way is to get it stitched from their neighborhood tailors, and that exactly divides them of the different styling and the other things. So let us look into this sort of a revolution in India. Is the traditional women's garment in large size has been very difficult to get because of the customized stitching by the neighborhood tailors. However, the same cannot be said for plus sized Western clothes for the above average body size. The established players who occupied the retail space in the ready-made apparel segments were primarily offering regular sized clothings. So generally, regular sized clothings were being offered, especially for the women segment. Recognizing this hidden demand for plus sized clothings, two entrepreneurs introduced trendy and fashionable clothes for women under the brand name Revolution. Now, the apparel brand was targeted at fashion conscious women for whom the standard size of ready made Western apparel did not fit properly. So, realizing that the usual practice of classifying apparel into XL and double XL size was physiologically demeaning. Why? Because this was actually trying to demean these type of customers who exactly had larger body size. So Revolution decided to change the name and categories as 1, 2, 3, 4, even 0, -1, and -2. Now it offers apparel in dimensions ranging from -2, that is 28 inches, to 4, that is 44 inches. So the pioneering effect has encouraged all the major garment and apparel brand retailers in India to offer plus sized clothing. Now, Pantaloon has launched specialized line with dedicated designs under the brand name A double L. Now, double L is in capital. Okay. And Westside has done under the brand name called GIA. So, what does this segment look like? So, you might be saying that this is actually a niche segment having a distinctive set of needs, and people are ready to pay a premium for the type of products that basically is for this segment. That is, maybe the size is small, but the profits is there and the growth potential is likely to be there. And definitely, this important aspect is towards efficiencies are there, the niche is there, which is very small and will become very, very profitable and all. And also, you see, Revolution has the brand of women apparel. It has successfully focused on niche segment of this plus sized clothing. So effectively, you see, this has created a trend that for other players like Westside, Pantaloon, and others to look at respect this category of consumers as well. This is one of the examples that I wish to illustrate from this sort of a caselet about something which is called as segmentation. So effectively, when we are trying to look into the market, we want to categorize market into different segments and create niche strategies for each of these specific segments which exactly are there. So effectively, there's a very interesting aspect that is changing the long tail. I would like all of you to read this story about the Pareto's ratio 80-20 rule, and how exactly this different type of product segmentation and this happens. And uh, this happens with all the type of products. It can happen to things like music. It can happen to segmentation in terms of books, clothing, movies, and we basically are adding more and more to the firm's revenue. Why? Because we're trying to segment it into homogeneous consumers out of heterogeneous group of consumers that are there, and trying to create individualized approached strategies for this specific segment. So effectively, it is comes down to something called as customization, or the type of segment of one or customized market or one-to-one market. Now, that basically happens to be the key content, and we will be moving to the last slide for this session, that is called as the legal and ethical issues. So, marketeers must avoid customer backlash. That is, you should not label customers. You should be looking at the vulnerable group, the disadvantaged groups, or the challenged groups, or the potentially harmful products that are exactly are there in the market. You got to be looking into that specific segment as well, because that is towards looking at the ethical choice. Now, you must try to see that there are certain type of singles may reject single serve food packaging simply because they don't want to be reminded that they are eating alone, or elder consumers don't want to feel their age that may not be appropriately mentioned them as an old. This product is for old people. So effectively, you should not look at these branding or these sort of segmentation like this, because your segmentation must not be looking at labeling customers, because this is very important that you should not try to look into creating some sort of vulnerability. The groups become vulnerable, or for specifically for children. You got to be very, very careful, because this segmentation must not be trying to put people into a disadvantaged group or a potentially harmful products being catering. Like for example, millions of kids under the age of 17 who are online, marketers have jumped online with them and offer freebies in exchange for their personal information. Now, that can be a very challenging issue, especially for people who are just new adults or who are not become adults, and their information is being compromised and being catered by marketers, because they marketers want information and they can be preferably in a harmful situation, or they could be their information could be exposed and could make them vulnerable. So many have come to fire for this sort of a practice that they have done for differentiating, because they have picked up information from different harmless areas, like for example gaming or for entertainment. They have picked up information from there, the marketeers, and they basically have exposed this sort of a vulnerable group or into a harmful sort of a situation, or in a disadvantaged sort of a situation. So there are certain ethical and legal boundaries in marketing to children online and offline continues to be a hot topic as consumer advocates. They decry the commercialism and they try to believe that marketing also sometimes endanger people. So not all attempts to target children or special segment draws criticism. Like for example, we've got Colgate Palmolive, Colgate's Junior toothpaste that has special features which are specifically designed to get children to brush longer and more often. They've got included a small animation, these cartoons and all to the toothbrushes. So children would be thinking that toothbrushes are something for as toy beyond oral hygiene. So basically, this basically sets them into a habit of trying to brush more often and improve their oral hygiene, because small children, they're more interested into eating chocolates and basically not brushing their teeth or not taking care of the oral care, and they're not very careful about how exactly to damage their oral habits. So effectively, sometimes we've got both the sides of the coin. That is, there's a good side, there's a bad side. So we've got to be as a sensitive marketeers, we've got to look into the legal and the ethical issues also, as well as the company's interest, and we've got to be socially responsible marketeers when it calls for targeting and looking into segmentation. So we also have to look into the interest of the target segments as well when we are doing segmentation. So we should not be doing things blindly, but we should be very, very sensitive to what we exactly are doing. And that exactly is going to define our entire orientation for this subject of marketing. Because many people are being very, very insensitive when it comes to how they are going to be using the strategies for the consumers. And the consumers are vulnerable, you have got to be very, very sensitive. And that exactly is the orientation we want to be looking at, not just profits and profits for large, but we've got to be socially conscious about our behavior and decisions and strategies that we make as marketeers. And that is going to play a very important role in our orientation for our consumers. And that exactly says that we are ethical and we are bound by certain uh, practices, not just mere marketeers. In the context, we've got to be very, very sensitive, and we should give the right information. We should see that they are protected. We should tell them information about what they're going to do, what their data that they're capturing, especially in the context of big data. I'm guiding one research in the context of big data, and big data is a very dangerous tool. It can be used either way. So if there's a person who's unethical or only looking at profits, it can create a hazard and a havoc for the, because we don't have a formal legal system in place to protect consumers' interests, and we've got to be self-conscious as marketers to look into that dimension. So with that, we look and finish with this segment, that is segmentation, targeting and positioning domain of marketing, and we'll be taking up another aspect in the next class. So with that, we come to an end of this session. It's about 10 o'clock, and that's about it for the day. If you have any sort of a query or question, feel free to shoot. Otherwise, we can call off the session for another class that is around the corner. And I have another class that to engage, that's on export import process and documentation. So I would request you to sign off, and we continue with that session. If you have a question, of course, you can always unmute your microphones and put forth.
So you asked to read about a rule. Which rule that was? I missed that part.
Which role?
Sir, you asked to read about some rule, the 80-20 rule. Which
Oh,
rule
the
was that?
Pareto's ratio. Sorry, it is called Pareto's ratio. Pareto. Pareto. Pareto's ratio. That is 80-20 rule. It's called. You'll find the very interesting that the book that I have given you or shared with you within the domain of that identifying market segments and target. There is a very interesting case select at the end that called chasing the long tail. The title is Chasing the Long Tail. It's about Amazon, eBay, iTunes, Netflix, and the electronic marketing products and electronic service products. It's called Chasing the Long Tail, where it talks all about segmentation. I want you to read about it. It's the sources is from Chris Anderson, Chasing the Long Tail. The it's a very interesting aspect. Interview with Chris Anderson, Wired, of 8 July 2006. That is there with that case study. You can read it in that book, and we it will be very interesting for you to supplement the session that we just had. Okay, and that 80-20 is called Pareto's ratio. I'll discuss about it, so we had some time when we are in
Yes,
the
sir.
class next time. I'll tell you what exactly it's all about. Okay, so
Sure,
that's
sir.
about it for
Thank
the
you.
day. If there is anything else from anyone, feel free to unmute and ask. Else, we'll sign off for the day. Okay, thank you very much.